My story is very personal, but it underpins my belief that if the Jewish community opens the door to interfaith marriage wider, the result will be more Jews and a strengthened Jewish community. I know more Jews from interfaith marriage may sound crazy, but it's been my own experience. I was raised in the Lutheran faith, a Protestant denomination born of Martin Luther's fierce questioning of Roman Catholicism. Every Sunday in my little church, there was a reading from the Old Testament, the Torah. I grew up learning all of the stories of the Jewish patriarchs and matriarchs, and I was taught sincere respect for Jesus' Jewishness and the Jewish people. Like many young people, when I left home and came to New York, I stopped going to church, and I essentially became a person for a very long time without a spiritual home or a religion. 25 years ago, I married a Jew. Peter was a first-generation American. His family had left Germany in the late 30s. He was staunch in his Jewish identification. He was closely tied to his boyhood synagogue in Washington Heights, but he did not attend services regularly or observe Shabbat. Of course, we talked a lot about the challenges of interfaith marriage. We took that Derek Torah course at the 92nd Street Y, although we had a different rabbi. It was a year-long course where we met other couples in our situation. For Peter, the most important thing, it wasn't the only important thing, but it was the most important thing, was that our children would be Jewish, mostly given his family history. I had no reservations about agreeing to that. I understood him completely, and I agreed with my whole heart, and I was excited about raising Jewish kids. I was open to the thought of conversion for myself, but I wanted to know Judaism better and be intentional about it. We got married under a chuppah, but by a judge. Neither of us was interested in hiring a rabbi simply because they were willing to marry interfaith couples. If it couldn't be Peter's rabbi, we weren't interested. Peter's mother and a few other family members strongly disapproved of our marriage, and this was extremely painful for Peter. But the pain of disapproval did not mean that we would abandon our own happiness. We were 42 and 33 at the time. I must mention he was the older one. And we knew how hard it is to find the right person. So we didn't have any hesitation about going forward, despite all of Peter's strong ties to Judaism. After our marriage, we went to holiday services, usually only holiday services, at Peter's shul, where he was beloved and respected. He was on the board of that shul. People were very cordial to me. It was kind of like they were being kind to someone who was causing an embarrassing situation. I grew very fond of these people. My husband had known almost all of them for his whole life, but I didn't connect strongly to Judaism there. The door didn't feel open. We had kids, and when they reached Hebrew school age, we were in a real quandary. At that time, Peter's shul, due to the age of the congregation, had no Hebrew school. Peter was willing to let it go for a while and see if a solution presented himself. Some of you here knew Peter, and I'm sure that you can understand him taking that point of view. But I wasn't willing to do that. I put my foot down and I said, we're going to BJ. I had learned about BJ from going to a bar mitzvah here where one of the families was an interfaith family, and I loved how that family seemed so comfortable and how they were treated here. So we became a BJ family, and before long we were attending Hebrew school retreats in dilapidated summer camps where it was freezing, and also other celebrations and services. And it was an expansive experience for me, but also for Peter. I still felt a little out of place, but I started telling people I'm not Jewish. I wanted to be forthright about it. I didn't want to seem as if I was trying to pass. And people were okay about it. I still belonged. My kids who had been converted were accepted as Jewish, which meant everything to me. I loved BJ, and I started learning more about Judaism. I began to feel Jewish a little. I still didn't convert. The elaborate conversion process seemed like such a big deal, and we were very busy with little kids and jobs, and it just never became a priority. Then 8 years ago, or almost 8 years ago, Peter died. Our kids were 12 and 10, and our daughter was 6 months away from her bat mitzvah. I would say that I turned to BJ in that time of sorrow, but what really happened is that BJ turned to me. Our family felt the full support of this community. It was very powerful, and it still is today. During that year, I said Kaddish for Peter, simply because I knew that he had done it for his own father. Attending the morning minyan here was a great source of comfort, but it was also life-changing. I could no longer say that I'm not Jewish. I felt it. I also wanted to wear a talit and stand at the bima at my daughter's bat mitzvah. So I asked our rabbis if I could convert. And I knew that 6 months was a very short timeline for conversion, so I presented my credentials, including the 92nd Street Y and the Old Testament from my childhood. And the rabbis came through for me. Rabbi Felicia guided me through the preparations and the learning. And in the midst of that very sad time came one of the most surprising and joyful moments of my life, when after I waited for what seemed like an hour, but was probably more like 20 minutes, while the Beit Din was discussing my application, Marcelo came out and said, "Welcome to your house." So I kept my deal with Peter. Our marriage did not cost Judaism either him or our children, and you got me as a bonus. Judaism needn't ever have worried. Peter was never going to lose his connection to Judaism. It was in his soul. My experience leads me to want to make 3 little points to the members of my community as we discuss Jewish identity, belonging, and the issue of intermarriage. Early in our marriage, I made Peter cancel our subscription to the Jewish Week, because almost every week it seemed like there was an anti-intermarriage article in those pages. Some of those articles were written by someone we knew, who knew us, who had eaten at our table. He liked us personally, but he felt very strongly that intermarriage would destroy the Jewish community in America. I felt that this view was a self-fulfilling prophecy. I felt that marriages like ours, with a sincere connection to Judaism and a commitment to it, shouldn't be lumped in with the marriages of Jews for whom Jewish identity was never that important in the first place. And the second thing I'd like to say is that little things mean a lot. One of the things I noticed when we joined BJ was that the cold Jeshurun mailings were addressed to me and Peter, and not just to Peter, as had been the case at his synagogue. I felt like I belonged in a little way. I was a member with an asterisk, but I was acknowledged. My presence was acknowledged, and that meant a lot to me. It was one of the ways that I felt the door opening. And the last thing I'll say is that Judaism, as a faith and as a people, is deeply compelling. There are few experiences as profound as sitting in this sanctuary on a Friday night. It approaches the divine. Sometimes my fellow Jews have expressed surprise that I converted. There seems to be a belief that conversions like mine might just be to get married and therefore not real. Like many converts, I took Ruth as my Hebrew name for a reason. The Torah is full of interfaith marriages that worked out just great for Judaism. I don't believe we should turn them away at the door, and in fact, I think we should open the door wider.